From claims of John's newly won heavyweight championship being fake to the UFC going after Francis for being a coward, let's look at the tense back and forth between Jones and the man who many think has the best chance of beating him. Though some people may argue that Bones looked too good for anybody. At heavyweight last weekend, the GOAT showed us glimpses of the John Jones who grew up beating legends at 205, submitting Ciryl Gane within the first 2 minutes of their fight.
But when you see it on camera, he's tight. Under the chin. Oh, he's got it tight.
Oh, yeah,
amazing.
He's squeezing there. Yeah, Gane wasn't going anywhere.
I don't think Bones got hit once, if you don't count the low blow Ciryl landed just as the fight started. He took the Frenchman down a couple of times before locking in a mounted guillotine. That left the commentators, his opponent, and the crowd stunned. I bet money on John to win myself, but via unanimous decision. I mean, he really sent a message to the entire UFC roster that he's here to rule the heavyweights with an iron fist, just like he dominated light heavyweight for years.
Yeah. Again, he pulls him into his guard. This is so crazy, and he winds up on the bottom in side control here. Oh, he's gonna...
That said, there's one blemish on this championship victory that John isn't responsible for, and he may never be able to remove it, no matter how many title defenses he records. He didn't win the belt from the true heavyweight kingpin, Francis Ngannou. What Jones did to Ciryl Gane with takedowns showed how far ahead of the division he is when it comes to wrestling, and the only athlete that I feel can overcome the Greco-Roman expertise Bones brings to the table is Francis. His sheer size and strength can bridge the gaps in technique Jones has built, and the one-punch knockout threat will give the GOAT something to worry about each time he shoots for the legs. As a matter of fact, Francis himself seems pretty confident in his title as People's Heavyweight Champion.
Oh my goodness, Francis doing jiu-jitsu. Reverse. Nope, I believe in the UFC back in the day.
Now, that's not really a dig at John Jones, though I don't think it matters how much you love Francis. You have to give the man credit for what he's accomplished against a fighter that even Ngannou couldn't finish in 5 rounds. Rather than being salty and bitter at the man now holding his belt, the Cameroon fighter took to Twitter and congratulated John on his victory. At the same time, however, he reminded the new champion that the true king sits at home watching the match. To be fair, Francis did go out on top, and it knocked out pretty much everybody there was to beat in the division.
Big man. Well, we're in the house that Shaquille O'Neal built, so we've seen this before here.
The most unique challenge to his belt before John was Gane, and Francis put on his most impressive performance to date against Ciryl.
Big mistake. Exactly. Mount.
Lock that started it.
But then he retired from the UFC. Now, you stop being the champion once you stop defending the belt. Like, that's just how the sport works. And Ngannou isn't free of blame here, but according to Dana White, Francis could have fought John anytime in the past 3 years. Ever since Ngannou got the belt, he was in a tug-of-war with the UFC.
Oh, uppercut.
Yeah, he's done. That's it. That's it. Wow. Knockout!
Over several issues he had with the way they did business. Francis wanted health care for fighters. He was advocating for higher fighter pay, and he wanted the freedom to fight in different organizations and different sports. For nearly 2 years, Francis had a very strained relationship with the top brass. They made an interim title a mere month after UFC 260, and you could make the argument that they were undermining the claim Francis had to the title because they didn't see a long future for him at the UFC. They were right, too.
Oh my God!
Oh! Huge right from Ngannou!
Negotiations didn't work out between the two, and the fans were robbed of a super fight that was set to break viewership records. The narrative in the past was John running from Francis, precisely because the former 205-pound champ was taking his time making a deal. Turns out, John genuinely had practical concerns with the UFC rather than fear of the predator.
Because of his wrestling. That if Reyes decides to close in on him, woo, look at this.
Once he sorted the problems with his contract, John was calling Francis out, left, right, and center. But the fight never materialized. Now, John's blaming Francis for running, and he might be right. Reporters couldn't wait to ask John what the future held for him and Francis as soon as he sat down for the post-fight press conference. And John rushed out of the gate with some classic Bones trash talking.
Knees and getting them into play.
Too much of this.
Oh my goodness.
He said it was weird that Francis had all that muscle, but is still such a I think John feels a little insulted by Francis as a competitor, even in his most bitter rivalry against DC. Once the dust settled, Jones thanked Daniel for the competition, so Francis, not even fighting Bones once, ticked him off considerably. Why wouldn't Ngannou want the chance to beat the best fighter of all time and etch his name into UFC history? Dana White echoed John's feelings. He said Francis just didn't want the fight. It doesn't matter how many fans demand the matchup. All it can do is push the UFC to make a matchup, which they tried to do, but Dana's right. If both fighters can't get on the same page, then there's nothing the promotion can do. We know Dana took Francis's departure personally because the president made unprecedented offers to the Predator, trying to book him against John. In fact, Ngannou was offered the most lucrative deal ever made for a heavyweight. This is where I start to think there was some truth to the claims of Francis being scared. The UFC met some of the demands, and if he was serious about the negotiations, he would have met them halfway too. The Predator revealed that he was set to make over $8 million just from the Jones fight under his new contract. That's more than what the UFC signed Brock Lesnar for, and he was the biggest star of that generation, and it's second only to Conor McGregor. This didn't miss John's attention either. It's only fear that can force a man to leave his championship vacant, turn away from the fight that would cement his legacy in the promotion, while also rejecting one of the biggest paydays any MMA fighter has ever gotten. The demands the UFC ignored were unrealistic anyway, like giving all fighters on the roster universal health care. It's a noble ask and a genuine problem, but the UFC will never change its entire business model so it can appeal to just one fighter. Sure, Francis defended himself, but without much conviction. As much as I want Francis to make a surprise comeback to the UFC and fight John for the belt, the Predator assured that it's probably never going to happen. Francis genuinely seems like he's moved on from the UFC because he wasn't watching the fight like a competitor. On his live stream, he only looked like an excited fan of the sport, laughing and whooping at John's victory. He wasn't even that impressed. Considering Francis had succeeded in taking down Gane and establishing top control, he was sure John would be able to do the same against the Frenchman. The submission came much faster than Ngannou thought, and while nobody expected that level of domination from John, Francis saw some holes in the GOAT's game. John's obsession with getting Gane down as soon as the fight started was a sign of weakness in the eyes of Ngannou. It may have turned out well for him, but this need to end the fight quickly could mean that John doesn't have that much confidence in his cardio at heavyweight. Maybe it means John fears the power coming back from the much stronger fighters he's going to face in the weight class and doesn't want to throw hands with the big boys. His wrestling is a sure shot path to victory, at least against Gane, so John ran from the more challenging prospect of striking with Cyril. Well folks, that's all the back and forth between John and the former heavyweight champion.